there's a host of reasons as to why you might want to create your own magic items. There's something you're excited about, and browsing through the DMG, browsing through independent products that you find on DM's Guild, things that I've done spotlights and reviews on, where it's just 200 pages chock full of brand new magic items. You just cannot quite find the right thing. There's something close, but it's not a shield. It's plate mail armor, whatever it may be. I want to offer you a few considerations, a few things to work through, to think through, that might just help you in that creative journey. Maybe allow you to approach this all with a little more confidence. Let's just jump into this very quickly. Here's some main considerations when you decide, for whatever reason, that you're going to make your own magic item for 5th edition D&D. This can apply to other editions and even other RPGs, but let's just stick with 5th edition D&D. The first thing that must be said, it maybe shouldn't be said, but I've been noticing a trend in this with this sort of strict adherence to what the designers wrote, to the rules of the game. And the first bullet point, the most important thing in this entire video, you don't need permission from anyone to make your own magic items. Yes, if you need to wrangle through the logistics of how do you get that to work in D&D Beyond or Roll20 or whatever your virtual format is, that's another story. But whether you can just come to the table with a sword that you made that's not in one of the books, yes, you can. That is the essence of D&D. I am here to remind you in this video and many other videos that are to come. Dungeons and Dragons is whatever you make of it. Your fun is never going to impede on the fun of others. As long as you and everyone at your table agrees with it and is excited by it, run with it. If there's a monster, a creature that you don't quite like, or it doesn't quite fit what you're thinking, build your own creature. If there's a world that you love, but there's a few continents on that world that just don't get you excited, build your own continents, build your own world. You do not need permission to make magic items. There's no hard, fast rule that says you've got to only reward your players with the loot that's in the books. Make up your own stuff. Now, something you do want to consider, though, is do you really need a new magic item? And ask yourself two very simple questions. What is it that you're trying to fix? Because maybe there's something already out there that's accomplishing that a little bit better. And the beauty and the benefit, and we'll get through this in a little bit, of using something that's already out there is there is some assumption that that stuff has sort of been balanced and play tested already. So you can have a little more confidence in giving that to your player because it's something that's been around for a little bit. You're not just testing it out for the first time. So really ask yourself, what are you trying to fix? Are you just sold and excited about the creative pursuit and the process, which is worth its own? Draw something, find some pictures, make it for fun. But to actually bring it to the table and hand it to your players and say, here's what you loot off of the fallen orc chieftain, and it's not something already in the book, just ask yourself before you make it, what are you trying to fix? And the second important question is, can you modify an existing item? Are you able to just make a few little changes and kind of use the base template of what's already out there? Okay? Now, we've assumed the point of the video, right? That would be kind of boring if I just said, really ask yourself if you need to make a magic item. And if you don't think you need to, well, there's no value in that, right? We've determined you're going to make something. Whether you just need to, you have to, you want to, doesn't matter. Are you going to modify an existing item or are you starting from scratch? Because the considerations and the things you want to work through will be different. Obviously, starting from scratch, you have a little more complexity, maybe a lot more complexity. All right? So determine that. We've determined you're going to build something, make something new. But are you just going to modify something existing or are you building it from the ground up? Does it actually need to be magical? Here's an important point to work through. Other than bypassing creature resistances, right? There's a bunch of monsters, especially at the higher levels, that say, unless you hit it with a magical weapon, it's going to reduce all your damage by half, right? That's what resistance is. So other than that, are you just looking to create an award, give to your players something that's cool and seemingly important? Because there's other ways to go about doing that without just calling it magical. You can give them something that's ceremonial, something that has a lot of sentimental value. These are items that don't register as magical, so they're not going to be shut off by an anti-magic field. They're not going to ping, so to speak, on the detect magic radar. They can't be dispelled, right? They don't register as magical. It doesn't mean they can't look really neat and fancy, but they're not magical, yet they still provide beneficial effects. And another way to think through that is, especially if they reward something that almost goes more into ROLL, so role play versus ROLE play. So there's no mechanics, there's no checklist of things that it does for you in combat. But by wearing this armor, which isn't magical, but it was gifted to you by the tribe's chieftain, it gives that character a sort of impunity. The ability to walk through a certain region without being harassed. Right? The PCs are wearing cloaks. They're not magical, but they were given by the Elven Lords. But these cloaks allow the PCs to move through various lands that are controlled by those elves, that are ultimately under the watch and the jurisdiction of those Elven Lords, and they're given hospitality. Without those cloaks, they're not afforded the same, the prices of all the food and housing in the player's handbook is double or triple. Maybe they're not even allowed through the gates. Maybe they unlock a rare book dealer for the wizard, or a rare potion, alchemist, herbalist, or something like that, that they would not have been able to meander through the city streets so openly, so freely, unless they wore these specific trinkets. These are not magical items, but they still hold great value for the story, for that character. So really think through, does it actually need to be magical? Yes, you can give these cool story-based properties to magical items as well. It can also be a staff that replenishes a spell slot, or it can be a shield that gives you +1 AC. But just think through that as well. Even if you are going to either modify something or build it from scratch, do you actually have to make it magical? Now, the 2 points that we're going to cover is dealing with modifying magic items and starting from scratch, and what are the various bullet points, as you can see on screen, that you want to think through a little bit. So when you modify magic items, there's many ways to do that, of course, right? The simplest ways are you can change damage types. This magic item previously did extra fire damage. It now deals extra frost damage. Depending on the environment that your players, your PCs are in, depending on the types of monsters they fight, just changing that might be sufficient for creating something that feels of value and almost new to the players, yet it's just a flame sword. It's now a frost sword, okay? You can change attunement requirements. Again, if the Elven Lords gave the PCs this item, that bow can only be attuned by your elves, by the elves in your party. But you're essentially just taking, and maybe you're just changing the weapon type. You're giving the properties that were a part of this dwarven hammer, and you're now applying it to an elven bow. So you're just changing attunement requirements. You can, of course, reduce or perhaps increase things. You're taking the exact same item, but in the book, all your players always know this as a +2 magic item, or a +3, it's a legendary or artifact item, and you're giving them a dumbed-down version of it that's +1. Or going the other way. This is typically a uncommon or maybe rare at most magic item, but you're going to make it legendary because it's a higher level reward, therefore it's now +3. All right? And obviously a very easy way of modifying, twisting, and changing magic items is just adding or removing bullet points until it meets the needs that you're trying to. Remember, I asked that in the very beginning. Do you really need a new magic item? What are you trying to accomplish with this? Start removing or adding bullet points until the magic item fits. Okay? So, for example, you can remove something on that existing magic item that says, when this weapon deals damage versus undead, deal an extra 2d6 radiant. Just get rid of that. So even though it's known as the undead scythe of death, you remove that property, and instead, you only give it the property that says, when you're wielding this, or you have this, you now have dark vision, right? It allows you to kind of dungeon explore a little more efficiently, or whatever it may be, okay? So just remove traits, features, add things, make the adjustments that way. Now, if you're starting from scratch and you're building a magic item from the ground up, all right? First thing you want to think through is try and go really big, go weird, think outside the box. Otherwise, why build it from scratch? If you're not going to really go kind of off the beaten path and take a real sharp left turn, maybe you don't need to build something new, right? Maybe you just need to make a few modifications. Maybe you don't need to make a magic item at all and just flavor things a little bit better in story, but give them something that's already existing as written in the DMG. But if you are going to go that route and make all these, create something that you believe is clever, unique, first off, creatively, I can tell you there's no such thing as an original idea. I don't care where that spark came from. Someone already thought of this. But if you're going to make something, go big with it. Make it really different. Don't create another suit of plate mail, another magic flaming longsword. Okay, create a whip that does something. A chain that the player drags along the ground. It's so heavy. We're talking like the things that anchor ships. But once they kind of, as a reaction or a bonus action, or perhaps for free, enter combat, that chain shrinks a little and snakes its way Kratos style around his forearm, and now it's wielded as like a whip or something like this, right? Or a flail. Build scarves, bandanas, not just helms and more plate mail. Get outside of the comfort zone. And also, when you're doing this and you're building from scratch, the way to begin, obviously you have to wrangle through this eventually. Don't confine yourself to rules and mechanics. Think outside of 5th edition. Think outside of D&D entirely. And then, to take it further, think outside of fantasy. Start pulling some reference points, whether it's artwork, visuals, images, watching movies that are sci-fi, Star Wars, Fifth Element, Blade Runner, right? Modern time, Call of Duty Modern Warfare. Play video games that are in entirely different genres and time periods. And think through, okay, that's a rocket launcher, that's a turret on a tank, but there is an apparatus of Qualish, right? Maybe there is a gnomish caravan that has some of these features. But don't confine yourself to the balancing points yet of, well, is this a +1 or a +2? And I don't know, should this be legendary or uncommon? And then what's the gold value of it? And then what stats is it going to modify when they put it up? Don't think through that yet. Just get crazy with it. You're building something from scratch. Make it worthy of being created in the first place so that it doesn't feel like, oh, you gave me something that I'm already sort of familiar with. It just has a few new words or labels on it. All right? The other thing you want to do when you're starting from scratch is start low and slow. And that's basically to say, think along the lines of common to rare rather than legendary to artifact. Okay? Start easy. Keep it simple. It's more complex, as it should be. I mean, read any legendary or artifact magic item, and the paragraph of bullet points and properties and traits and features is a pretty long list. It fills up a whole page oftentimes. Okay? You want to think of things that, in one sentence it tells you what this does and it offers +1. Okay? So start small, especially if this is your first foray into creating new. You'll notice the start small thing really applies to more than just creating magic items, creating worlds, creating factions, races, continents, new races, new playable classes, subclasses, campaigns, adventures. Start small. Weave through it. That way you also haven't invested so much time, energy, and effort if it doesn't work out. If it ends up sucking, if the players don't respond the way you thought they would, you didn't invest too much into it, right? So that's it for the two main points of, are you modifying something or are you starting from scratch, and what are the points to consider? Finally, let's look through a couple of real quick final considerations when you are creating your own magic items. Take a look at the deck of many things, right? That's a pre-existing thing that's been around in D&D for a very long time. It's iconic. And what I'm trying to say here is official items, such as the deck of many things, in some cases, they can ruin a campaign. And not every official magic item, something that's written, as right there listed in the book by some designer, by some official Wizards of the Coast employee, not every item, not everything is a fit for every game or table. So really think through that. And that kind of gives you a little more permission, like I said in the beginning, that even the designers, the official stuff isn't always going to work for you. So give yourself the freedom and permission to make your own stuff. So with that, don't be afraid to experiment. Okay? Now that being the case, here's a few tips on balance, which is sort of the big one, right? That's the crux of it all, because that's what can cause that hesitation of not trusting what we're going to make. It sounds cool on paper, but how does it play? one of the things you can do to help you kind of work through balance is consider level up items, right? Maybe the more famous ones, even though I know he's not the first that started this. Matt Mercer's items, like the vestments of Divergence, I think, they have these different states, right? Like awakened states, where the item starts out dormant, and then through various things that happen in the world, maybe actions taken by the players through roleplay elements, you can reach different states on that item where it can now go from a slumber to awakened and so on, and it increases in power. Of course, you have the iconic video games like Diablo, socketed items that you would find in World of Warcraft, right? You put a gem that has a certain property in it into this, the pommel or the hilt of this sword, and it gives it, Infinity Gauntlet, right? As you start, so now what you do is with level up items, it helps you work through balance because you can start low and slow. And also you give that item a lot more value to the player, where every time they find a new sword that's supposedly more powerful, they don't want to get rid of the one that they currently have, because that one has also some sentimental value, and they trust that they're going to be able to level it up as they go. You can have some blatant thresholds where it just says it's a +1 sword. But the moment, without you doing anything else, the moment you level to 9, it becomes a +2 sword automatically. It kind of grows with you. So definitely consider level up items. Also, have a conversation with the players. From the outset, session 0, or when you're thinking about making these new items for next session, just say, hey guys, let's try this out for a second. If this item is too strong, I'm going to nerf it. Worst case, I'm going to take it away from you, and then I'll try and give you something else. Right? I think if you build and you establish that communication, it's not as harsh. You don't want to rust monster your players. It sucks. I've been there as a player, and I've done it as a DM. To give your players a taste of something and then take it away because you over-tuned it, right? You didn't understand how to wrangle through it, and you gave them too much too soon, perhaps. It's too strong for their current level. Or you just gave them some properties that you probably should have never gave to a magic item anyway. Right? One thing you want to be careful of all the time, no matter where you are, what level of power of item you're creating, don't step on the toes of other classes. Tread lightly with that. Don't give the barbarian some sort of ceremonial cloak that also has a property of, as a bonus action, they can now disengage or hide. Right? We're talking about core features that really make the rogue stand out. Otherwise, why wouldn't your rogue just want to play barbarians because they get more hit dice? They might take bear totem to give them resistance. They're going to endure more damage. They have the ability to rage. And then in order to fix some of the roguish stuff like a sneak attack or all of the cool things they can do with bonus actions, all they need to do is put on this ring. So be careful stepping on the toes of making your sorcerer get some of the benefits of a wizard just simply by wearing a magical hat. Okay? But have a conversation with your players. If it's wrong, if it's broken, they knew that. You're testing this stuff out. You're going to do the best you can. You're going to try and accommodate their desires, their wishes, the feedback they gave you of what they'd like to see in a magic item. But if it's wrong, if it's messing up your game and stressing you out as the DM, don't be afraid to take it away, in-game or out of game. Okay? And finally, the last consideration is go back through everything I've already talked about in this video. Maybe you don't need to start from scratch. Maybe you just need to twist something that already exists. Because the benefit of using pre-existing content is it gives you a better baseline for balance right out of the gate, because it's already figured out to be a rare and not a very rare. And the bullet points should follow suit. And when you make some subtle changes and nothing too crazy, you can kind of stay within those categories, within those boundaries. I hope this quick rambly video has helped you in your journey to, most importantly, remind you that you are free to always build, create anything you want. But there's some things you may want to consider to help you do so more efficiently with a little more fairness and more consistency. That's all I have. See you guys soon.